Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics, or are your politics starting to shape your faith? In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our guest panelists for today. First, we have with us Mr. Reaffirm Baker, President and CEO of the Baker Strategy Group and a University of Maryland professor of public policy. We also have with us Ms. Melissa Reed, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have with us also Mr. Andre Wong, who's the General Counsel of the North Pacific Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we have Ms. Carmela Monk Crawford, who's here with us, who is the editor of Message Magazine. Thanks so much for being with us, ladies and gentlemen. Looking forward to our conversation today. You know, the role of chaplains we've been talking about in many different episodes is really starting to expand. And in a particular part of California, in the city of Carlsbad, there's been a really strange phenomenon that's happening. And what's been going on is there have been two chaplains who were engaged in working in one of the public institutions there that was told that if you are praying, you cannot say in the name of Jesus at any public events. You know, this was something that was kind of strange because the group decided that they were going to go forward, make a complaint, and because the chaplains cannot in good conscience erase the name of Jesus from their own thinking was their viewpoints, they were thinking that maybe we need to go to court and fight about the opportunity to be able to express ourselves in prayer any way that we see fit. You know, the interesting thing is a lot of the work that they were doing was actually voluntary, and they've been chaplains for multiple decades. But the idea now is that even though you're a chaplain, even though you may be called to be in public service in some way, maybe the idea of actually using the name of Jesus Christ could be actually offensive to other religious people. You know, Andre, when we look at what's going on here in Carlsbad and understanding that there are these broad legal terms that we are trying to figure out how to understand, but in the same breath, it looks like the role of chaplaincy is turning on to a whole new dime of activities. The question is, has Carlsbad gone too far here? Or should these chaplains, based on their training, already know how this should be handled?
Yeah, so you talk to any pastor that served in a chaplaincy role, they'll tell you that part of the role is being sensitive to the situation, knowing when to step in, when to withdraw, when to invoke spirituality, and when not to. So it's the position of chaplain is not a proselytizing position, but a role that provides encouragement, support, counseling, even access to resources. You know, we have chaplains in departments, fire departments, police departments, military, and they step in really at times of crisis, at a point of trauma for both the first responders and the victims to which they were responding to. So, the role of chaplain is bigger than just a spiritual role. And you can talk to a lot of the chaplains that I interface with. They will even say, sometimes I am the only person that this either this first responder or this victim in circumstance has to rely on for support, and that chaplain will walk with them, and not necessarily in a spiritual journey, but even just in a life journey, just walk with them to make sure that they get the assistance and support and resources that they need.
I think he's absolutely right. I mean, the thing that strikes me about this case is whether, in fact, they understood what the limitations and requirements were going to be when they were chaplains. Having run a government where we had chaplains, and also having served in the military where we have chaplains, is them understanding what that role is going to be and whether they can conduct it that way. Because if they can't, I think you can't, if they didn't fully understand it, you then can't turn around and say someone to leave out the name of Jesus Christ in their prayers if they don't understand what their role is going to be. And I think that's where the conflict is. Do you understand what we're requiring you to do? If it's going to go beyond what you think you can do, then we need to get someone else.
I agree with both gentlemen as far as, first of all, that, we have this historic tradition of chaplains serving in civic roles in the military and fire and police departments. And doing so, we have that tradition because they have provided such a service, right, to the individuals that are serving, as Andre said, in a time of crisis. I was talking to a friend of mine who has served as a military chaplain, and I was asking them, is it, I know that chaplains in the military are called, just like the individual here serving in this capacity, to serve the broader community, right? This is not a sermon on Saturday morning or Sunday morning. This is, a broader community. And so I asked, are chaplains required to use particular language, or are they encouraged to be inclusive as far as, sort of what's the, and they were saying, it's not a requirement. But it is absolutely something that is encouraged, because again, your goal for the prayer is to promote the morale of this community, right? This group of individuals, to create some cohesion within the group, and to provide support during a very stressful time. And so, I think the way that you best reflect Jesus Christ is by providing inclusive prayer, right?
But Carmen, something's a little bit interesting here, in that Justice Kennedy at one point in a decision said that, if you're just engaging in what they call a legislative prayer, then that legislative prayer is something that basically should satisfy the Establishment Clause, but it doesn't say anything about, and make sure that you're saying something that, quote unquote, may not be offensive to other individuals' religions. I think there might be a possibility this is just, quote unquote, a legislative prayer of some sort. And maybe that in and of itself should grant them the ability to kind of say in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, at first I'm hearing what these esteemed panelists have said so far. And my first reaction is, come on, man, you can't tell me not to pray in the name of Jesus. Everybody that I know who is a chaplain is going to pray in there, because I know many Christian chaplains, and I bet you the city of Carlsbad wouldn't walk up to Senate Chaplain Barry Black and tell him, do not say the name of Jesus in your prayers. This is well established and well accepted that these prayers are overall something that is something that is shared in good faith, shared in the spirit of the moment to support. And it's one of those things. And we're talking about people who are volunteers. So, if it was me, I would say, I couldn't do this, but I agree. Yes, your job is to be there for everyone, but I think this is kind of untenable if that's going to be the expectation.
Well, and Andre, I think there's something to be said about, listen, you asked me to come and pray. I don't work for you for a living. I'm not even sure that my role here was to be a spiritual leader. My role was actually someone wanted to begin or engage in some type of invocation, some people may call it. And as a result thereof, it seems like maybe this is a little bit too restrictive. If I've got you and I'm hiring you to do a specific job, maybe I give you a, scope of employment and these things are in there. But if you don't have that, maybe, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, and as another panel had discussed about, there's this issue of tolerance or intolerance to some particular denominations, and whenever I come into contact with clergy of other faiths, whether it be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, I will ask them to pray in their own religious tradition and their religious language even. And I've been blessed to have the name of Allah invoked in a prayer on my behalf. And I take it for what it's worth. And it's not something that is done maliciously, but really whenever a prayer is offered in whatever faith tradition, it's done what it's intended to do, which is to provide that moral and spiritual support at the moment. And of course, but I'll go back to my first comment, is that chaplains are trained to be sensitive to the circumstances, to be sensitive to the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to, I think, this should be more recommendations and, best practices rather than requirements or prohibitions as far as, what language is used and things like that. All of us, we've all attended prayer breakfast, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's put on by our state government, whether we're hosting the event, mm-hmm. all kinds of. And one of the things it's so beautiful is coming together and seeing the diversity of prayer that is offered, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
also the way it's done with such a diversity, as Andre said, maybe praying to a different deity, but also oftentimes different languages and things like that. And yet you see in those situations, those communal situations, that there is always very deliberately a level of respect for those that don't share those same faith traditions. And so I think that should be the ultimate goal. Do I think that the name Jesus Christ should be prohibited? No, I don't. But I think best practices for those wanting to serve in that capacity is to try to be as inclusive as possible.
Well, Sharon, I think maybe some of the confusion here is coming from the Kennedy Bremerton case, where you had the coach who wanted to be praying in the middle of the field, and the idea was, well, you had the lemon test under all circumstances, that probably would be barred. Well, the court has now come back and basically kicked the lemon test kind of, out of the arena. Almost made it seem like prayer whenever you feel like it, as long as you're handling on your own. And it also seems like it's making clear, and whatever way you're doing that prayer, no one should get involved. And maybe that's part of what's causing all the confusion, that you got a legislative organization saying one thing, and then you got the Supreme Court. It looks like they're opening the door real wide.
No, you're absolutely right. And you find that now, especially in the state houses, because they don't have a permanent chaplain in those. So what you find is that everyone who comes up to pray, and this was the way that we had it in Maryland, is they're given the rules of what they can and cannot say. That might be offensive. Now what you start to see more of is folks will come up, and we'll just use Christianity for an example, and we'll say, I'm going to close the prayer in my own words, so I'm going to use Jesus Christ. You do it in your way. But still, the legislatures are trying to be inclusive enough, because they are opening up with a prayer, a moment of silence, and those things. And so I think this latest case has made it even more tricky for a lot of these places.
Orlin, I think we're going to see more and more of these type of cases post Bremerton, right? Because you have this sort of vague new test, limit is out and history and tradition is in. Well, what that means is, to be determined. And I think we're going to really see cases pushing to actually get some sort of definitive understanding of, what is appropriate, what isn't, and in a lot of situations, how far can I go as far as establishment clause, right?
And, I think Andre probably hit it on the nose when we started saying, the idea we as a society, we really have to learn to absorb more tolerance. The idea that somebody else may be praying in a different way from me, and I happen to be in that public square, maybe I can just absorb it, learn from it, and not cause a war over it, and maybe we'll all be better off. There's a case that's out there that's called WallBuilders versus WMATA DC Transit Agency. And what we have is that the transit agency has basically put a ban on religious ads. And there's a question as to whether or not that violates the First Amendment. We have a Christian group who basically is upset because they saw something as a violation of free speech when the WMATA transportation service in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area ruled that they must display the nonprofit's previously rejected ad, which says the First Amendment should grant all people the opportunity to express themselves, but the ad itself was viewed as being something that had a religious connotation. All of a sudden, we started realizing that there may be a problem in terms of censoring religious speech in an act of discrimination. And because we put it in a quote unquote advertisement, maybe there's a problem. WMATA policies basically censor any advertising message just because it's religious. And the district court for the District of Columbia is dealing with this issue, and they talked about the fact that WMATA displayed 4 advertisements that have been proposed by a faith-based group, which is called WallBuilders, and after they reviewed it, came to the conclusion it could not be out. You know, Rashawn, when you take a look at some of the work that WMATA does, and the interesting thing about WMATA in particular, the Washington metropolitan area, it's actually what I would call a multi-jurisdictional operation. So it doesn't lean more to DC, doesn't lean more to Maryland, doesn't lean more to Virginia. It's actually supposed to be kind of taking in all of that. But here we have probably a question regarding what you can do in the public sphere on public transportation in maybe one of the more religious parts of the United States. And now we're looking at advertisement that they're saying has to come down. But I would guess that you could go on there and see every gambling joint in Maryland advertised on there, and there's no problem. Does something seem wrong here?
I know this case very well because I appointed a member of the WMATA board and this came up. It gets to the point where you're talking about, where you have this multi-jurisdictional agency that's going in Virginia, DC, Maryland, and different parts. And you have a metropolitan area that has various religions. And so what WMATA tried to do was play it safe and said, we're going to now censor, and that's what they did, censor religious speech. But they had other things that bordered on things that could be considered either religion or a censorship of speech in it itself. I think WMATA got it wrong in trying to be really politically correct. But I think in this case, they tried to play it where we wanted it as neutral as possible. But then when correctly, WallBuilders pointed out that other advertisement was on there that approached this, not just the gambling, but also issue ads that might be social and somewhat religious in theme, if not direct. And so I think in this case, WMATA got it wrong.
Yeah, I agree with Rashawn. This is an overreaction, and one thing that they teach you in constitutional law and law school about First Amendment speech is that the regulation cannot be broad and overreaching, right, and vague and overbroad. Here we had the one of the ads was the iconic painting of George Washington kneeling in prayer in Valley Forge. And, I think we all know that painting with the word Christian ? Below that. That was what sent up the red flags. WallBuilders then amended that to just the picture itself. They took out the Christian part. Still violated the guidelines because, and I believe the wording is, that the issue ad cannot influence members of the public on an issue where there are varying opinions. Well, I mean, you could put up an ad about anything, and there could be a million opinions on going to the Washington, going to see the Washington Wizards, to shopping at a particular store, and so I think we're in the vague and overbroad territory here when it comes to regulating the advertisement here.
I agree with both gentlemen, and I'm looking at the organizations that brought suit here. It's First Liberty, which is a religious liberty advocacy group, and the ACLU. I don't think they partnered together on a lot of lawsuits, and I think the fact that they are in this one is really indicative that this organization got it wrong. As Andre mentioned, just really vague language like any issue which there are varying opinions. As Andre said, tell me an issue that there is not a varying opinion in these days. And also, as Rashawn pointed out, there have been other situations where there has been speech on issues in various pieces of advertisement. So they need to be consistent. I think they need to update their guidelines.
Carmelo, what's confusing to me, though, is that there clearly are some rules as to what you can't put up there. I never see any beer advertisement. I never see any smoking advertisement, going to places of ill repute, those type of advertisement. So clearly somebody has drawn a line somewhere there. But I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous being in public squares where we've got to have people talking about religious activities, because sometimes you're not safe and maybe you're better off just keeping all of that out the public square.
That's the problem with censorship, whether we're talking about religious issues or not. We're getting into a space where either people are so afraid of what is being discussed, or like I said, they're over vigilant. And now we have this, really, what's the word for it? This inactive electorate, uninformed people, because we are not bringing these issues into the discussion. And what are we talking about here? An advertisement on a bus, an advertisement in a metro station. What is this? And it is, it seems like there's maybe one person looking at this with the smell test, and their nose is out of joint. I don't know what's going on. So as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I agree that this is going too far, and is overspreading the issue of religious freedom and religious liberty, but it's also an issue of censorship that we really have to guard against.
But Andre, there's already going to be censorship everywhere you go. And I guess the question is, where do you draw the line? To be honest, there are two conversations that people say you should never have in polite company. One is religion and one is faith. And somehow we jam that into one program here. But the reality is that there is censorship, whether it's quote unquote from a big picture standpoint or from a small picture standpoint, sometimes just to have safety in a small space.
Yeah, and you're right when it comes to, there are things that we can all agree on. Advertisements on smoking, drinking, certain adult content venues. But let me be clear about for our viewers that may need clarification on this. The reason why this is an issue is because WMATA is a municipal government agency, and so because this is a municipal agency, therefore we're now in the arena of government regulating speech, and so and particularly religion, and so that's why that's why we're looking at this as an issue. If this were a private enterprise, let's say Greyhound bus or certain private transportation service, it's their sandbox. They get to make the rules. If you want to advertise in their particular business or in their sandbox, you got to play by their rules. So that's why we're talking about it in this context, is because WMATA is a government municipal agency.
I think that's a really good point that Andre's making. In a previous episode, we were talking, and I think we've talked about it a few times, of sort of how social media plays a role in the conversation surrounding religious freedom these days. And, the point is, for social media, those are private corporations, right? They have governing bodies. They have standards, and they have the right or the ability to say, we're going to limit your speech, right? The way that you say things, the topics that you talk about. Now, I may disagree with that. I think that we have experienced sort of overcorrecting in that space. But again, that is their right and their privilege as a private entity. And so Andre's point, as far as this being a public municipal agency or organization, that is where the real distinction is.
But that's the problem, isn't it? You're saying their organization, their rules. That is exactly why this program exists and why the Constitution exists, is because you can have overreaching even while you're doing your duty to enforce the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And in the specific nature of this case, when you're talking about the facts and what was actually censored, it is just what was censored was actually a statement that is echoing the Constitution, that people have the right to give their opinion, whether religious or secular. That is a free speech issue, and it is the right, whether you think it's a religious freedom issue. Either way, it is still protected under the First Amendment. And so, no, they do not have special localized rules to keep people out of the public square.
But we're sharing, is it really overreach if I say, you know what, there's 1,000 other places you could run this ad? You know, you can go get a billboard, you can go here, you can go provide a private institution. If a quote unquote government or municipal organization, maybe based on what's going on in that particular jurisdiction, thinks, you know what, let me err on the side of caution. And it's not like that's the only game in town. I mean, in and of itself, that seems like that's not overly unreasonable, is it?
No, actually, it is overly unreasonable because this is the public entity. The other thing you have to remember is they put the ad up. And so it wasn't until, if I remember the case correctly, someone on the metro, a person, complained. And rather than defending why we are doing this, they decided, you know what, it's just easier if we just take it down and strike it. And they made a very overly broad regulation that then they went and violated that overly broad regulation by putting some social posters up that could be seen as religious conversion themselves. And so that's the problem you run into, as the panelists have said, is that rather than looking at what is constitutionally corrected, we err on the side of free speech, not on the side of limiting free speech. And that's what WMATA did, just really to say, I don't want to have to deal with it. You don't have that option when you're in the public sphere and you're a public institution.
Well, I think what we're really looking at here is this kind of line in the sand between how do you protect free speech at all times? And when you're in the, I would say, in the business of looking out to protect religious organizations and also in the business of ensuring that Americans get to be Americans pursuant to the First Amendment, there are times you're going to see something that may make you uncomfortable, and the mere fact that you're uncomfortable is not enough to shut the whole operation down, and we're going to see more and more of that as we continue in life. Hey, Andre, tell me something I don't know.
Since we were just talking about WMATA, WMATA operates 1,500 buses, over 1,500 miles of surface streets in DC, and 128 miles of metro track.
Wow, didn't know that. Rashawn, tell me something I don't know.
Since we're talking about religious freedom, did you know that Al Smith lost twice for president? And once he lost, no Catholic would be nominated for president of either party until John F. Kennedy.
Wow. Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
All right, well, Orland, this is actually the second lawsuit dealing with, we're talking about WMATA again, that the ACLU has filed against WMATA on this particular issue. Back in 2017, they filed over very confusing, again, talking about inconsistent and discriminatory behavior. And an ad for Plan B was allowed, but an ad for a competing abortion bill was denied.
Carmela, tell me something I don't know.
I'm not sure if you know this or not, but I am watching in the coming up to the election, the move of evangelical voters, especially groups that are trying to level the playing field in the perception of who is the best evangelical candidate.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, great conversation today. Looking forward to doing it again. And thank you again for being here with us. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.